I'm going to show how to dry an organic solution using sodium sulfate, and the key is to add the sodium sulfate until it's free flowing. So let's say you're extracting some product from an aqueous solution for the third time, and throughout the extraction process you've transferred some water over with the organic solution and want to remove it so it doesn't contaminate the product. You'll want to grab the sodium sulfate from the front of the lab and take a small amount out using a weigh boat to take back to your lab station. You should add the sodium sulfate in small portions in order to not add an excessive amount, and then stir up the solution so that it can interact as much with the water as possible. The sodium sulfate will begin to absorb the water and clump up, looking like this. The clumps that you see have formed by absorbing the water that was in the organic solution, so what we want to see eventually is individual crystals that don't clump up with the already existing clumps. That means there would be no more water to absorb and the solution would be dry. And at that point, the sodium sulfate would be free flowing. There may have been a few individual crystals that were free flowing, but I'm going to add a little bit more sodium sulfate so that we can see it better. As you look at it from underneath, you can still see the clumps where the water has been absorbed, but there are a lot more individual crystals that are free flowing and not clumping up, so this solution would be dry. Once the sodium sulfate is free flowing, you can then transfer the solution to a new container using a Pasteur pipette to continue the next steps of the procedure. Now, let's say that during the extractions, you accidentally transferred over a good amount of water with the organic solution. So as you add the sodium sulfate, you'll notice that it requires a lot more to absorb all of the water, and you're going to see large clumps without any free-flowing crystals for a little bit. But as you continue to add more, eventually you might be able to see those free-flowing crystals, but it might end up being so much sodium sulfate in the Erlenmeyer flask that it's going to be really hard to see those crystals among all the other clumps. What you can do is transfer the solution over to a clean Erlenmeyer flask, therefore removing it from the larger clumps where the water has been absorbed. Then you can add some sodium sulfate to that new Erlenmeyer flask, and without the excessive amount of sodium sulfate in there, it should be pretty easy to see that these crystals are free flowing. Now, the problem with using this much drying agent is that it's very likely that some of the organic product would have been left behind somewhere within all of that sodium sulfate. So what you should do is rinse that sodium sulfate with some of the same organic solvent that was used in the extractions to reclaim the product that would have been left over, transferring that solution over to the original dry one, still making sure that those crystals in the new Erlenmeyer flask are free flowing. Then you can transfer that dry solution over to a new container to continue the procedure.